welcome to the Radiant Astrology Podcast. I'm your host, astrologer Christina Caudill. And in today's episode of the podcast, my guest is Fern Vucinic, and she is an evolutionary astrologer and herbalist. And we're going to be talking about how the astrology community can be more open and inclusive to the differently abled. So, welcome, Fern, for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Christina. I super appreciate you giving me this opportunity to speak and be heard.
Wonderful. And just so our listeners know, Fern is going to be one of our speakers at our upcoming summit, the Astrology of Awakening to the Renewal of Hope. And that is coming right up April 15th through 18th online. It's a free online summit. Register free today if you haven't yet got your free ticket. And Fern actually won one of our, we ran a competition and had, we selected 4 astrologers, and Fern was one that we selected for her talk on supporting the lunar nodes with herbs. And so we're going to be talking to her a little bit about that as well, because she is also an herbalist, as I said. But in today's talk, I thought it was so generous of you, Fern, when I was getting set up for this upcoming summit, that you offered to help us make it more accessible, because that was an interest of ours. It's something that, we want to make other, differently abled people, whether it's they're deaf, hard of hearing, or other, have differences that make them feel, normally unwelcome. We certainly want to try to accommodate as much as we can. And even in this very interview, I just turned on the Zoom closed captioning, which they just started doing live transcript closed captioning, and it's both for paid accounts and free accounts, which is awesome. And I'm looking at it now, and it's actually looking pretty good on my end. So we've been playing around with it a few times. And again, Fern, thank you so much for joining me today. And I so appreciate you not only having this discussion, but also having been instrumental in helping us to sort of get up to speed with helping to, be more inclusive.
Thank you, Christina. I'm super happy to help with that because I think that the technology is adjusting so quickly. And unless you have kind of a personal reason to use the adaptive technology, you may not know about it. So I'm trying to spread the word as much as I can. And I'm learning a lot from deaf activists and, other adaptive technology activists who are really helping lead the way with us. So I'm happy to share it with this community as well.
Oh, that's perfect. And we were talking earlier about, even you working as, your deaf, hard of hearing astrologer. And one of my questions I immediately thought is, do you serve the deaf community, or do you also serve those who are not deaf, or is it a mixture? Or, what is your clientele like being an evolutionary astrologer?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So because I have a genetic hearing loss, it's there's 3 generations of my family are hard of hearing, and it wasn't my mom was hard of hearing, but she didn't actually even get tested until she was in her 20s. She was raised in an immigrant farm family in the Central Valley, and they just, she read a lot, so they just thought she was a bookworm. So when they didn't really know that I was hard of hearing until I was about 3 years old. And at that time in the early 70s, the sort of way that the culture dealt with deaf people is to raise them in the oral tradition. So I was encouraged to learn I already did lip read, I just naturally kind of picked that up, but I was encouraged to wear hearing aids and lip read. And I did not ever get exposed to American Sign Language. So I grew up not learning American Sign Language and raised in what they call the hearing community. I wasn't exposed to deaf culture at all. I sought that out myself later, but my ASL is still very minimal, just because it's really hard to learn a new language when you're older. So to answer your question, my clientele is primarily hearing people. I do have a few clients who are either hard of hearing or have other disabilities. But I would love at some point to become fluent in ASL and expand my reach in the deaf community. But for the last 15 to 20 years of my practice, it's been majority, hearing people.
Okay, and mostly in the past, you were able to lip read, and now with some technology, you're able to say like read some. For instance, here we have like closed captioning that sort of helps the process a bit.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, before Zoom meetings, when it was just, I tended to prefer in person because I can read lips, and when it's not noisy in the background, reading lips and my hearing aids, that was a workable combination. I wear two high-powered hearing aids, and they work very well for me. They don't work for every person with a hearing loss, but I was lucky in that way. But then I also used to have a closed captioning phone, that the technology was super clunky. And just before COVID hit, I was starting to do more and more Zoom meetings because I could read lips, in the video, but it wasn't, there was glitches, of course, and people are super patient, and I feel very grateful to have such loyal clients who would just be patient with things that didn't go through perfectly. And then in just the last 6 to 8 months, Google Meet, I heard about, they have a really good AI technology caption, and I was using Google Meet for a while. And then I think just a couple of months ago, I heard about the Zoom caption, and that's been a complete game changer. It's really allowed me to step out a lot more and make connections with the astrological community in a way I couldn't before.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I think that this is a great, opportunity that as the technology sort of catches up with our needs. And as I said before, like Zoom not only has it for paid accounts, but now for free accounts, which I think is so important because, as we talked about, we have this summit coming up. This is the fourth one that producing. And the ones I did in the past, the one I did last August was all recordings. Now this coming up one is going to be live. And the recording one, actually I had people in the summit community says, you know what, you really should think about having closed captions, or closed captioning the videos. And I looked into it, and actually price wise, it was way ridiculously priced. But fortunately, my husband had some extra time that he took the videos, and he used this software called Otter that like did transcribing, and he had to line it up though with the video and stuff, so it took him some time, but luckily, fortunately, we were able to do that. I started freaking out though when I realized, wait a second, my next event is live. What are we going to do for live? I can't imagine, the cost of that. And then luckily I heard about Zoom and their live closed captioning. And so I think that's super helpful because now there's really, no excuse, because sometimes it can be hard for these summits, like to even, make any money out of them. They can be very expensive. So the fact that this is an additional service that isn't costing us more, I think is so super helpful. And it's kind of like there's no excuse. I mean, I got called out on our kickoff call. There was somebody who was actually in the audience who was deaf, who said, where's your closed captioning? You should be able to do live closed captioning. And that was the thing that made me realize that, wow, we do have the technology, so there's no reason not to use it.
Absolutely. I think it's just a matter of communicating about it and advertising about it, because I know I heard about it word of mouth. I didn't see any kind of big announcement from Zoom. I didn't get a thing in my, newsletter. So it's interesting to me that they have the technology, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of budget to let people know that it exists and make it easy for them to use, which I question that.
Yeah, so that's right. That makes me think that anytime I do a live event now, I'll make sure to call it out, because I think, it's the people, the viewers on their side. There's a little CC, it says CC live transcript at the bottom, and they just click that, and then that will, be ready to go. And not only for the deaf community, but also for people maybe that have difficulty, understanding English, and if it even helps one person to be able to connect with our work, then I think that it's really super valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And we mentioned last time, I think we spoke about a little bit about Clubhouse, which I'm really hoping will kind of catch up to the speed of Google Meets and Zoom and use the amazing technology that's available to provide closed captioning to the deaf and hard of hearing community on Clubhouse. Because at this point, Clubhouse is making it much more difficult for people with disabilities or differently abled people to participate.
And you said you had a little workaround, right? You would
Yeah,
like play
yeah.
the audio.
I'd love to share that. I learned about that from a deaf activist who was on Clubhouse, and I reached out to her and I said, how are you, what are you doing? How are you participating? Because I can't figure it out. And she said, what I do is I'll have, Clubhouse on my phone, and on my computer or my iPad, I will set up a Google Meet and add transcripts. And I guess you could do it with Zoom as well, and then just put the phone near the other device so it catches up the sound and that will transcribe it. So that's what I've been doing when I go on Clubhouse. But again, it's an extra step. The audio isn't always good enough because people, mumble or whatever, so that the transcripts don't always pick up. So if it came from within the app, it would be much easier and make it more available for people to participate.
Yeah, and I think this is a good opportunity to say that, it shouldn't just be deaf activists, speaking up for themselves. I think, any of us who are members of, Clubhouse or Zoom or whatever there is out there that we hear that people from, the disabled or deaf communities are struggling with something, then we should be able to, to voice our own concerns as well, because it sounds like it's at this point, it sounds like it's really the deaf activists like kind of speaking up for themselves. And I'm sure more voices can usually get some change to happen.
Absolutely. I've been reading a really wonderful book lately. It's called What Can a Body Do? How We Meet the Built World by Sarah Hindren. And it's all about how, what she calls people with disabilities, and her son is disabled, but she calls them misfits. And she doesn't mean misfit in terms of, being an outcast, although that is part of the experience of the disabled community, but she means misfit and it not being a right fit with people's bodies and the built world, the external physical world. And that she's a professor of adaptive technology design and an engineer, and the whole book is about the history of people's bodies who aren't necessarily a correct fit, and how they relate to the built world and all the new ways that architects and engineers are sort of rebuilding the world to make it more a better fit for everybody's kinds of bodies. So it's a fascinating read, and it really makes me think a lot. We were talking also before about Chiron, and Chiron in Aries, and Chiron being the key to unlocking the mystery between Saturn, the fixed realm of the world where there's boundaries and limits and you keep bumping up against walls, and then Uranus, which is breaking free of our limitations and innovation, and Chiron being the planetoid that kind of rules disability. And you brought that up, and I just love that. So I wanted to
Yeah.
bring that up again.
And Chiron for me, I often see it as like adapting. It's adaptability, and another thing that I'd love to touch on too that you had mentioned before is that because you had this limitation with your hearing, that you feel that you've really developed your psychic sense and other senses that have been able to flower and bloom and sort of almost make up for any kind of perceived lack with hearing. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that? And I think you said also not only yourself but other deaf practitioners that such as tarot readers and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, and this is not just, I was talking to my husband, and I were talking about this very subject recently, and he always remarks upon how he notices that, I just have this highly developed sixth sense, that and I don't perceive myself as being clairvoyant. I know people who they'll say, okay, on this date, you're going to be wearing white and this is going to happen. And that's not my ability. But I do sense things that other people do not, and I always thought everybody did. So it I think when you're missing a sense or missing the full capability of a sense, that your other senses develop in more deeply. And so I think I just tune into things that aren't necessarily being spoken in a much more direct way, and understand and am able to bring that information up because I've learned how to articulate it over the years better. But yeah, I do have some amazing colleagues who I love doing trades with them, because the information that comes is just so rich and profound um, and strong. You know, I feel like they're able to, because they trust that part of themselves, they're able to bring it forth in a really powerful way.
Wow. Oh, I love that they trust that part of themselves, probably because they use it more in
Yeah.
their, I would imagine, your everyday life. And so as you work with your clients as an evolutionary astrologer, I imagine that, like, I know sometimes if I'm talking to a client, on Zoom or something, I may spend quite a bit of time just looking at their chart while they're talking, because then things sort of come alive to me as they're speaking. Like I start saying, "Oh, no, that's their Venus, or that's their, square with Mars or something." And so for you, looking at needing to look at somebody's, their to lip read, so needing to actually be seeing their face and seeing what's communicated that way. How do you tend to work with that and their chart? When you're doing a reading.
Yeah. So I have my own particular system, and I feel like it, to me, it's, I kind of tune in to the part of their chart that feels like I need to deliver that particular message. To me, it's a bit like channeling. Um, and I'm able to look at the chart and kind of take a picture of it and know that's what I'm going to talk about. And
Take
it's
a picture in your mind, like the memory is really sharp.
exactly. And I think I mentioned, like, in my bio, that I have kind of a photographic memory for astrology charts only. Not for name, not for dates, but astrology charts. Not always, but most of the time, if I've seen your chart, it's like there I can go through a file in my brain and pull it back up again. So to me, the doing a reading or doing a session, it's each person is different, and I connect with that person's energy. I kind of download their chart information, and what comes out comes out. And it seems to be welcome and appreciated, because I have clients, going back 15 years, who I hear from every year, and I'm so grateful to my wonderful group of clients. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. And so, as also when you were learning astrology, you have a master's from Stephen Forrest, evolutionary astrology, from his apprenticeship, and which is wonderful. I mean, who doesn't love Stephen Forrest and all he's contributed to astrology? And I know that you've said that learning as a student in his course, you had asked for to be able to sit up front so that you could lip read, and he actually made accommodations for you. I think that's really important for astrologers to know who teach, to not only open up, say yes when it's requested of them, if it's something that they can accommodate, but maybe also consider to open up and maybe reach out to, just in case there are deaf or differently abled people in their communities, because otherwise I think we expect people who need accommodation to speak up and let us know, but that's already, that puts another burden on them, I
Yeah,
think.
thank you so
So
much
yeah,
for
go ahead.
saying that. Yeah, you mentioned something about that, about I think if it would be wonderful if on websites for events or workshops, if there was a section that, if you need accommodations, please contact this person and we can work with you. And it reminds me of a story that I read in the book that I mentioned, What Can a Body Do?, where she was talking about um, activists who before there were curb cuts in the curbs, the people who were, urban planners, the people who are designing cities, they said, well, we never see people with wheelchairs on the street, so why would we need curb cuts? and they didn't register that maybe you didn't see people with wheelchairs on the streets because they couldn't be on the street. So as a way of making this more visible, they had a big action where they had people who used wheelchairs and other, mobility devices, crawling up the steps of the Capitol, without their wheelchairs, and it was a huge visual protest that really brought the point home that we are here, and we would be more here if the world would be more adaptable to our needs. So I really love the point that you're making of don't wait for somebody who has a need in that way to reach out to you. Make it welcome, and maybe they will show up. And yeah,
Yeah.
just going back to Chiron again, I think that having a sense or a physical limitation compromised doesn't make you less of a person. It makes you somebody who knows how to innovate and knows how to adapt. And that ability in itself is a form of intelligence that I think everybody can benefit from, just like, the ancient Greek heroes benefited from Chiron, who also had a disability or was differently abled. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that.
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up because I think the beauty of Chiron is when we can really be honest with ourselves. And maybe we all in some way may feel limited or vulnerable or something or wounded. And especially in Aries, it seems like I'm from the Chiron Aries generation, and it seems like we can really defend against, that wound. And it was a psychotherapist once who had told me something like the energy of anger, for instance, is, it's a protecting energy. It wants to protect us from the more vulnerable sides of ourselves that maybe we're not ready to deal with, or maybe we want to be in denial of, or that it's not ripe enough for us yet to come to consciousness. And so that defensive energy can kind of get in the way of us, fully embodying ourselves and accepting ourselves. And I think once we can see that, whether it is, being differently abled or disability or a limitation, or simply even an emotional wound or whatever, the Chiron essence is bringing up, then I think when we can then accept it and say, how can I then adapt around this, or maybe use this as part of myself. I remember seeing once in some, and I can't remember who it was, but there was some like Olympic like, what is it, sailboat racer, like, now those things, to race a sailboat, like, that takes a lot of physical skill. And the person like was missing a limb or something, but they were like a gold medalist or something. And I said, let me look at this person's chart. And it was like massively, maybe Chiron conjunct the sun on the mid, like major, like this was a nation of Chiron in the world. And I thought, wow, like that's really like saying, I have this urge within me to do something or to achieve something. And, just trying to fit into what the world expects for, someone with, a physical limitation, that would feed into that story of limitation. But this person was not going to do that. They found something within themselves to adapt and then to excel. Sometimes it can be even that, that Uranian influence that comes out of, created out of nowhere, that can kind of excel even beyond the boundaries of Saturn. So I like to look at Chiron in that way too, as the maverick, the one who sort of creates their own reality.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a woman that some of you listening might have heard of, and her name is Haben Girma, and she is a deaf-blind um, activist, but she was actually one of the first deaf-blind women to graduate from Harvard. She's Nigerian by birth, and she's going to have a book coming out, a memoir soon, and she called um, disability or differently abled, she called it being an opportunity for innovation. And she's done some amazing, amazing things And I love the voice that she brings to this topic. It's just very strong and powerful and innovative. So, and I love what you were saying about Chiron and Aries in particular, that kind of defensive angriness, because I've been going through my Chiron return. I just kind of went through the exact part of it. And over the last year, I've really been finding the courage within me to kind of come out more as somebody who has a hearing loss, to be more public about it. And that's been really inspired and supported by a lot of the, Black Lives Matter activism, and, the current, like just what's happening with Asian Americans, just seeing people, saying, no, we have a right to our humanity and this is not okay. And that really resonates to me too with the Chiron and Aries piece. It feels like a coming together and a healing of some of that standing up for ourselves kind of energy.
Yes, and that is the solidarity. I think some of the part of the solidarity that can be so important and helpful is that we realize we don't have to fully stand alone. And when it's your group or your people or you being attacked or being in some way marginalized, I think something that we said in our conversation before is that you had said that it can be really, life in general can be very tiring and draining, and to have to find your own accommodation in the world, and then on top of that you have to be an activist. You have to advocate for yourself. So I think that when we can all sort of recognize where one another needs that help and support. I mean, me as an Asian American, I saw the Black community immediately come out in support of Asian Americans when there was when we were really the center of being attacked. And that made me feel like I didn't have to be the one to have to speak out for myself. There's something really powerful when other people are doing it on my behalf, and that makes me feel stronger. And then that makes me feel like a lot more sort of that I can have self-respect in who I am, not being of the majority ethnicity. So I think that we can start to recognize. I've noticed a lot of, like, especially the Black community is advocating for so many other marginalized groups. I'm also seeing in the this whole concept of ableism, which is something new to me. Like, I've recognized racism, and then there's also ableism, where we assume that everyone is able-bodied and capable in all the similar ways, or they are less than. And so that's something that we need to be waking up to as well. And not only just the bodies, but there's also neurodiversity. I understand that is something that people are starting to talk more about, like, with mental health, and those who are maybe differently differently wired, I guess you could say. Again, this is something that I'm learning too, but that's another part of, I think, the ableism um, activism that we want to be aware of.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to just share a story, because what it makes me think of what you're saying, that my first mentor, my first astrological mentor, her name was Asata Gabrielle, and she was an African American woman. We met, she was 40 and I was 20, and we developed a very tight, close friendship. And she taught me so much about everything, most specifically astrology, but also herbs. And she was the first one who really encouraged me in terms of my hearing loss, to advocate for myself. And she, besides, being an African American woman in a very white community, Sonoma County, she was agoraphobic, and which means she couldn't leave her house. I think that's what the right term, yeah. And part of the reason for that was because when she first moved to her all-white neighborhood, they happened to move across the street from a Jean Birch society. And she went out one day with her young son, and she was followed around the block by a person dressed in a Klan's outfit.
Oh my
And
God.
yeah, and so from that time forward, she had a really hard time leaving the house. And so, I'd go visit her and we'd hang out at her house and we had wonderful times. But she taught me just so much about self-advocacy and bravery and courage, and what it meant to be differently wired or be in a marginalized community and hold on to your power and your self-esteem. So I just really appreciate you bringing that up. It also makes me think about this Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius and coming together in community. So uh,
Oh yeah, and maybe this Saturn and Uranus square that we're experiencing all year, I think that can also be like, hey, the structures like you were talking about earlier, the structures in our society that we are assuming are, what are supporting um, everyone in the community, maybe those also need to be reorganized. And just technology itself, I can imagine, like I was thinking of the woman you were talking about that graduated from Harvard that was blind and deaf. I would imagine what a miracle it would be for people to be able to communicate both ways with her through technology. And technology really has the power to change so much. So I think, we see a lot of clashes, like direct clashes with Saturn and Uranus, but maybe some of them don't have to be clashes if we recognize that there's people who need other accommodation, and technology can just be the container for that, to help us connect more.
yes, I love that, because when I think about a square, I mean, this is something that Stephen really stresses in his teachings, is that the challenging aspects aren't all bad, and the so-called soft positive aspects aren't all good. That when I teach about the aspects to my students, I talk about a square as being a 90-degree angle, which from geometry is two lines intersecting, which you could see as two sticks rubbing together to create fire. So there's a creativity and a passion and an excitement that can come from a square, besides the tension and friction and challenge. And with the Saturn Uranus square, I can see that there is some creativity and excitement coming out of those planetary meetings.
Mm. So, give us some ideas of how you feel like the astrology community can be more open to deaf and hard of hearing astrologers, and also maybe how astrologers can open up to their clients who are differently able. Does anything sort of kind of come out at you that people could maybe easily start to implement?
Yeah, so thank you for asking that. I First of all, I think just what we talked about earlier, if you're going to have an event or make an offering, to be inclusive, to put something up in your communications. If you need accommodations in this way, this is what we have available. We to get to know the technology that's out there, and to learn about that proactively. I think in terms of working with clients who have some kind of need, adoptive need, asking them, how can I make this an easier process for you? What can I offer you to make this go more smoothly? And how can I be supportive?
Oh, that's great. And I think I know that when we spoke before, and we keep referring to when we spoke before because this is our third time doing this recording. Because the first time, I don't know what happened on my end. But somehow the thing didn't record, and then the second time we didn't have good Wi-Fi. So looks like this might work this time. But so we had time to like think about what we were going to talk about. But I think one of the most important things too on my end that I realized in our conversations is to not assume that there just aren't deaf astrologers or deaf people clients listening to your, to attending your webinars, or wanting to attend your classes and things like that. That I think that assumption alone is just part of the being the closed minded, because they are out there. And I think I know that you had said before, Fern, that having to call yourself out and contact, say you're going to a conference and there's nothing there that says anything about accommodation. You have to kind of find the courage to do it. And yeah, you yourself have learned to be an advocate for yourself, but that's kind of still asking more from the differently abled community, to, hey, like, get to, advocate for yourself and tell us blah blah blah, like what you need. So I think anything we can do to just make people feel a little bit more comfortable, just like that step is just opened up a little bit more for them. It sounds like that could really go a long way to helping sort of ease the burden a little bit.
Absolutely. I think just we would had talked a little bit about marginalized communities kind of being a 12th house subject, hidden behind the scenes, not really, out in the light, so to speak. And I have a lot of planets in my 12th house, including my Mercury, planet of communication, right up next to Pluto and Uranus. And I think that it is easy to forget about or not want to pay attention to those 12th house themes because they bring up fear in people. There's an unconscious fear, am I going to have a loss of an ability? And as we spoke about before, everybody at some point in their life will have the experience of being disabled, whether through illness or aging or, just any other kind of experience. And so there's something about facing the fear, working with the fear of those 12th house energies that I think can be bring a lot more wholeness and empowerment to humanity at large, so to speak.
Yeah, and just like you were saying that, as we age and technology just seems to be going faster and faster, there's always those jokes like, I don't know, in the commercials and stuff like that where there's like grandparents and they're just like asking their little, grandchildren who are like preteens to help them figure out, the phone or something like that, which is so true because technology can be helpful and it can help us to be even more connected and it should be more and more intuitive. But as we age, I mean, even I can't even figure out how to do. It took me forever to figure out Instagram, and like forget about TikTok and all that stuff. That's not just not going to happen. But I've also accommodated elderly people in certain ways, like walking them through certain things with like how to join Zoom or my webinars. I love the boomers, they're like totally like they speak up. They would, especially like I mean, there's so many of them learning astrology now, which is amazing. And so I think in that same way, it shouldn't be so, out of the ordinary to help others connect to what we do. Because, and if anything, astrology, it's so great because it has a potential to help any human being, and why wouldn't we want to try to open that door for somebody else, especially with the technology? I mean, can you imagine it wasn't that long ago when astrologers had to like draw charts by hand and do all the calculations by hand? Luckily, I came into astrology after, astro.com was a thing.
I know,
So,
I know. I was right on that cusp of that, and my mentor Asata, she knew how to draw a chart by hand, and I'm mathematically challenged. And I remember her saying, "Just use the computer. There's this computer program. I'll teach you how to use it," and that just opened it all up for me. Part of me wishes that I knew how to do that better. I know the few basic steps, but I think it trains your brain in an interesting way to hand draw a chart. But it definitely, I came in with a computer generation, and that really helped a lot.
I think that's one thing. I think we can actually really credit having free astrology software, planetwatcher.com, astro.com, and others that I think we really can credit that to help with this boom of astrology, that everybody suddenly can see more than just their sun sign, more than just read their horoscopes, and people can become astrologers, and so, yeah, it makes me just really, really appreciate all the people who came before us who sort of and went, through the technology to sort of create that for us and make it easy for everybody. So we know, even as, abled, normally abled people, or however you want to call it, we know what it's like to, have the gift of technology open a whole new area of life for us. So, I think with that we can also realize that it's on us to help anyone who's differently able to feel more accepted. And I would even open that up to just inclusive of others anyway, no matter where people are coming from. And so there's so many things right now that we're waking up to with people from different backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds and able backgrounds and things like that, that we really want to, I think, just stay open-minded to it all, even if we get things wrong. I think that's also the other thing, was I put it out there that I wanted our upcoming event to be more accessible, and I was called on it, and so I'm still learning the different things, but I'm willing to make mistakes, and as long as I can then find a way to sort of get up to speed with what needs to happen to make our events and even just my own business as an astrologer, more inclusive of people that could really use it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think again, it brings me back to Chiron and Aries. It's like, you Chiron and Aries is like that jumping headfirst into something, just trying it, and then you make mistakes, like the Fool card in the tarot. You step off the cliff, you fall. Sometimes you land in a good place and sometimes not. But I love your courage and your kind of just kind of, to me, it brings up Aries. I don't know if you have any Aries in your chart, but I'm
Oh
gonna
yeah, I have a packed
be
Aries
strong on
third house.
this. Yeah. So, you took the hit and you kept on going. You weren't just like, oh, I made a mistake, so I just don't want to deal with, disabled people. I don't want to deal with this. I'm going to close the door. And a lot of people do that. A lot of people say, this is too hard. I don't want to serve this audience. These people are not for me. And I feel like Clubhouse, in a sense, is kind of doing that. But you chose a different path that I think is more open and inclusive, making me think about transiting North Node in Gemini. And just for me, collectively, that North Node in Gemini is about staying open-minded, continuing to learn, being connected to diverse people, asking questions, and not staying in that more fixed Sagittarius. I know already, this is the road I'm going. So yeah, I really appreciate how you're working the transit.
Yeah, and it makes me think of, again, the Saturn Uranus square is, it's kind of like now we're, a lot of people feel like you're either going for like the innovation and trying to get up to speed with all the fast thing that's happening, or the Saturn is just like, okay, I'm gonna just stay with what I know and get even more, like you said, even more defensive about sticking with only what I know. But it's almost just like, I feel like the movement is this, we're in Aquarian times, and Aquarius, if nothing else, sometimes when we're in this transitional period, right? In between times, because we're just waking up to what other people, need and want in the world, and all the possibilities that technology can bring for us, so that's all this, I think, Uranian energy. And it's like, you're either going to be part of the progress, or it's gonna hurt. Like, what is that? I love that Zen saying, like, let go or be dragged. And this way is like, you either let go of your old ways, or you're gonna get dragged through it. And like I said, with technology, there's really no excuse. And I'm even thinking, like, with my podcast, I know there's people who um, get transcribe each podcast. That's something I'm looking into. I think it's like an extra step that, again, it hasn't really caught up. I know people like pay people to like transcribe their podcasts. For now, for this one, because I want to get it out before the summit, I thought the video is great. I'll have it up on my YouTube channel. People have forever have been asking me to do videos, and I'm like, I'm not video friendly all the time, and I don't like to pressure my guests to have to be video friendly, but if it actually helps people to connect with the work, then to me, that's a better reason to do something, just rather than just like being on camera for no reason. So I need to have a good reason, and a good reason is so that people that want to connect with this work and the messages that astrology has to bring can do so.
Yeah, absolutely. I I and I think though, the beauty of the technology is that even if you do just a audio podcast, if let's say I discovered your podcast online or something, and oftentimes with podcasts, before Google Meet came around, I'd be like, oh no, I can't listen to a podcast. Everybody's listening to podcasts. People ask me all the time, have you heard this person, have you heard that person? I'm like, no, I'm deaf, I can't hear podcasts, I have to read lips, I need caption. But in the last 6 months, with the Google Meet, I can have a podcast playing, put Google Meet on my device, and it will transcribe. So all of a sudden, I can take part in listening and speaking in podcasts because of the technology. So that's revolutionary for me. It really is. And that is something, if you
Absolutely.
aren't able to do video or do the transcription, you could even just put a blurb under it and say, to any deaf or hard of hearing people who want to hear the set up Google Meet. It's an extra step, but it does make it possible, and not everybody knows about it. So it can be helpful to share about that.
I'll do that. I'll definitely be doing that with my podcasts, and I'll try to figure out transcription. I've just heard that, transcribing, especially when we're talking astrology, we didn't talk a lot of astrology today, but
Yeah.
that transcription may need a lot of editing. But I'll put the Google Meet thing on there for sure so that people know, if they have this option for podcasts. So I definitely wanted to, before we wrap up, to get to let our listeners know more about your talk coming up for our summit, which starts in less than a week on Thursday, April 15th. Let's see. Your talk is on, what day is yours? Yours is on, I think, Friday, right?
Yeah, the 15th. It's
Oh, the 15th, the
oh,
first one, Thursday. Yay. Okay. And
oh, Thursday. Okay.
Thursday's the 15th. Okay. I can look it
Okay.
again, just make sure.
I don't know.
Well, I know you're on the earlier end. You're on the early end during. So for our listeners, the Astrology of Awakening to Renewal of Hope. It starts Thursday. It's a 4-day event. It's free to register and to get the recordings for 24 hours. They're all live Zoom videos with closed captioning. We're going to make sure we have that. And you get them free for 24 hours, or you can upgrade to the All Access Pass and you get lifetime access to the recordings. And so tell us about your talk, Fern. You're going to be talking on herbal support for the lunar nodes. That sounds right up my alley. I love that.
Great. Yeah, it's really a wonderful opportunity for me to blend two of my greatest passions, which is, plants and planets, or, the stars and the flowers. Um, and there's a long history and just the history of healing, basically, and the integration of astrology and healing medicinal herbs. So there's been a renaissance in the last 10 years, both amongst herbalists and astrologers, who are rediscovering that history and bringing it alive again. So this particular topic, very dear to my heart, and it came out of being an evolutionary astrologer and always being very passionate about the nodal axis. And just, I'm a Virgo, and I always love to give my clients and my students like something to do, something to do with your chart. It's, it's like I can explain the story, and that, consciousness is absolutely the first step. But a lot of times then people are like, okay, so what do I do with this information? And I like to give people healing stories, but I also like to give them something tangible, to relate to, as a way of really embodying their chart. And medicinal herbs are just a wonderful resource, a wonderful remedy for the astrological chart. So this topic is, I'm going to go through 12 different herbal allies that correspond with each of the north nodes, and also heal the south nodes, and talk about why are these herbal allies connected to this particular nodal placement.
Oh my gosh, I love that because, the thing is, they often say that in Western astrology, we can see in the chart maybe where there's some challenges or opportunities, but we don't really have the remedies. You think you have to get kind of creative, if you are running into some tricky aspects in your chart. In Vedic astrology, though, they do have remedials for certain things, especially and for the nodes. So I love that you're bringing that in, like something to help support with the nodes, because the North Node, often we see it as an opportunity for growth, but growth can be really uncomfortable, because and just even the nature of growth is you're growing into an area where maybe you're not already capable, or where you're weak, or maybe you need to do some stretching or some transforming. And then the South Node, even though it can have some of our greatest gifts, it can, or parts of ourselves that we know are already strong, it can also bring up, some of the more, I guess, shadow parts of ourselves, and things that need to be released. So I love the fact that you have some herbal support for both of these, potentials.
Yeah, I mean, because I, as an herbalist, there's many different ways to connect with and learn about the plant. We can do it from more the physiological, chemical perspective of looking at the plant constituents and, studying how those have an effect on the body. But there's also the emotional, spiritual realm of the plants. And if you believe that things are sacred from an animistic point of view, then each plant has a particular spirit, and how we relate to that spirit and how that spirit of that plant can support our spiritual evolution, which is what the North and South Node, represent in the chart. It just seems to me to be a natural fit. And it's not, this is not something new that I've made up. This is something that, historically speaking, in the Western astrological tradition has always been there. It just kind of fell out. So Culpeper, who was an early astrologer, herbalist, maverick, very Chironian character, he was the first in kind of recorded history to talk about. He assigned each plant a planet, and in some cases a sign. And he specialized in treating poor people, and he gave away a lot of his work for free, which may have been a mistake, but but he helped a lot of people. And that's something I'm going to be talking about in my talk. I'm going to start off talking about the history of the integration of astrology and herbalism.
Oh, that's beautiful. Oh, I'd love to learn more about that. Yay, it sounds amazing. So definitely check out our summit and check out Fern's talk on herbal support for the lunar nodes. I just had pulled it up. It is on Friday, April 16th. Okay, so you're on the second day. That's what I have. Is that what you have? That's what.
I think so. I got it on my calendar. I just got it.
Okay, at yes, at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. I think GMT is 10 p.m. GMT. It's 4 hours after Eastern, and don't miss it, because it's going to be an amazing, amazing talk and an amazing 4 days with 19 astrologers plus myself, even though I'm not presenting. So I just rounded it up to 20, right? And however, I will be hosting a couple of the roundtables. You're also going to be talking in one of our roundtables too. On that Saturday night, there is the roundtable on Jupiter. Well, I started with Jupiter and Pisces, but it's really about, is there a new roaring 20s on the horizon? That's what so many of the pundits are saying. And I think we can see it with maybe Jupiter and Pisces. Might give us a little sense of, the nature of like the society, what society is expanding into, and our societal experience. Jupiter is going to sort of get out of the constriction of Saturn's rulership there when it goes into Pisces. And so I'd be curious to see what the astrologers think about that. You're joining us for that one, right?
Yes, I'm super excited. A number of the other astrologers have been saying how much they resonate with the 20s, and I've always had such an affinity for that era. So I mean, I was, it's funny because when you invited us to participate in one of the panels, I was kind of like, well, maybe I should go over to ethics because that's, my Virgo self and the hearing loss piece that really fits with that. But I was like, no, I really want to be part of this one. It just calls to me. So I'm very excited to be part of that one. Yeah.
Yay. And we're going to try, those of us that can, we're going to try to dress up or do some kind of like flapper roaring 20s thing or whatever. I think I still have a little flapper wig and some cute little stuff. At the very least, I might just do a green screen or something like that to make it look like I'm at a Gatsby party or something.
Absolutely. I love that. I got my outfit already.
Oh,
Be
yay. All right.
variety, it's all about the outfit.
Yes, great. Oh, I'm so glad everybody's like 100% on it. And afterward, there's also going to be an after party that Miss Chartreuse is hosting because she just loves to party. So then we'll get a chance for the community and the summit to talk about what came up for them. Maybe some people have some real, ideas around, what's going to happen once more people start getting out of lockdown and out of constriction. It seems like there's all this pent up energy, and there's so many different ways of looking at it and sensing what might be coming over the next couple of years. So I'm super excited about that. So anyway, thank you so much, Fern, for joining me today and for being so generous with your offer of support to help us to get up to speed and to open our doors and our minds to more of the astrology community that is out there and that likely needs to feel more welcome and needs to feel more part of the astrology community. So I so thank you for that.
And thank you, Christina, for being so welcoming. And, you were the first one in the outer astrological community to really open the door for me. So I really appreciate that. And I'm happy that the third time is the charm. Very magical. We made it work. It seems like.
Yay! Well, that's great because, I had said after the first time we had the perfect interview, and I don't know if it was me. It was obviously me. I did something wrong with the recording, but now we've had time to really kind of deepen the conversation and everything. So I super appreciate that, and I look forward to seeing you on Friday at the summit.
Me too. Okay, take care.
Bye.
Bye.